Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the pituitary gland. So this is your last lesson for the year, the pituitary gland. And since we haven't really got much into the endocrine system, I thought the pituitary gland is probably the one thing I want you to cover because it's the small gland that controls many, many hormones. So we can cover a lot just by looking at this one gland. So it's about the size of a pea, located right below the hypothalamus, and found at the back of your brain. So the pituitary gland is part of your endocrine system. It produces and makes hormones. Your hypothalamus, we covered, is part of your nervous system because it conducts electricity down neurons, but it is also part of the endocrine system because it also makes hormones. So it's a part of the brain that does both of these things. So when we look at the pituitary gland, it's about the size of a pea, and it's actually not one gland, but it's composed of two lobes. And each of those lobes works a little bit differently. We've got the anterior and the posterior pituitary. They are attached by a thin stalk to the hypothalamus of the brain. And they're responsible for releasing 10, and I'm going to add another one, so 11 main hormones involved in the body's metabolism, growth, development, reproduction, all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot going on with this one little gland. So if we look at this right now, I'm just going to start with, not with the endocrine gland, but I'm going to start with the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus will actually send an electrical signal down to your adrenal glands. And it will send the signal to the adrenal medulla, which means middle. Okay, so the adrenal medulla, and it will cause the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, as you can see here. Another name for epinephrine and norepinephrine is adrenaline. So this is released in times of a fight or flight when you're in an emergency situation. And it's electrically connected directly to the hypothalamus, so it can be fast. So this is part of your fight or flight, in an emergency run from a lion situation. It will directly, through the nervous system, signal the adrenal medulla to release, we call adrenaline in emergency situations. As far as the hypothalamus goes with regards to the pituitary gland, it will cause the release of, we're going to look at a whole group of hormones here. And of course, then the hormones will end up in the bloodstream, and they might target other glands to release other hormones. It's much slower, but we want our fight or flight to be quick because emergencies can come upon us rather quickly. So I just wanted to quickly cover that. So the first hormone for the pituitary gland we're going to look at is adrenocorticotropic hormone, and it goes right here, ACTH. We find that in the anterior pituitary. So this is the anterior pituitary. And it's responsible for causing the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. So when we look at that great big name, adrenocorticotropic, it targets the adrenal glands to release cortisol, and it's a tropic hormone because it's causing the release of another hormone. So a big name, but worthwhile knowing it just because it tells you exactly what it does. So the adrenal cortex is found on the outside of your adrenal glands, and your adrenal glands are located above your kidneys. So cortisol is for your long-term stress response, and adrenaline is for your short-term stress response. These hormones deal with stress response. Okay. The next one here is called thyroid stimulating hormone, and it stimulates the thyroid to release thyroxine, which is a hormone that affects your metabolism. So it's going to, again, it's tropic, because it's causing the release of other hormones, and it's going to target your thyroid gland. And these hormones deal with, as I said, metabolism, how quickly you burn energy. We also have growth hormone here. So growth hormone, or sometimes known as human growth hormone, it targets your liver cells, your muscle cells, and some other tissues. And obviously, we release a lot of it when we're growing. And then when we stop growing, we don't release as much of it. And the older you get, the less you release. Next is prolactin. And that targets the mammary glands for milk production. And then we have these two hormones, FSH and LH. Okay, and these two hormones target both the testes in males or the ovaries in females. So these are reproductive hormones. And they are tropic. They cause the release of other hormones. And of course, this gets quite complicated in females, and we don't have time to go through it. Which is unfortunate, because there's a lot of really interesting information and understanding the hormones that go on with the reproductive cycle of women, especially if you are a woman, because it kind of really solves a lot of issues in your head. So fortunately, we're not going to be able to get through that. We also have melanocyte stimulating hormone, and that deals with pigmentation, melanin in the skin. Okay. And ADH, antidiuretic hormone. I'm going to flip over right here. ADH is antidiuretic hormone, which deals with, and it of course targets your kidneys, as I said, and it deals with releasing and retaining water. Typically a diuretic is something that makes you eliminate water through, obviously, your excretory system through urine. So coffee and alcohol are great diuretics, right? They cause you to literally pee out excess fluid from your bloodstream, and then you can become dehydrated from that. This is an antidiuretic, so it helps retain the water in your bloodstream. And again, this one here, this last one, which we didn't put anything down for, is oxytocin. Okay, and again, that's just one of my favorites. It's a really neat little hormone. It has a job in both, childbirth and breastfeeding for milk release, contractions of the uterus for childbirth. It's also part of the contraction of smooth muscle in the ductus deferens and prostate gland in men, but it also affects cells in your brain for bonding. So it's just a really neat hormone, but we really won't get into it. One more I wanted to include, and this is from the anterior pituitary, is endorphins. And endorphins are released a lot of times when we exercise, especially vigorously. We get a runner's high from endorphins, and they affect your brain. And endorphins are great for pain relief, which is why after a good workout, maybe that headache you had before you started will be gone for a while. What is this? Editor's pick. That's going to be right in your lesson. Isn't that lovely? Okay, so moving on. Just a little extra note about your posterior pituitary and your anterior pituitary. Your posterior pituitary is not a real endocrine gland. Okay? Not a real. It does not actually produce hormones. What it does is it stores and releases the hormones ADH and oxytocin, but those are actually produced in the hypothalamus, which is endocrine gland. Okay, if it's producing the hormones itself, it's considered an endocrine gland. So that's just sort of for storage. Now, the anterior pituitary is a true hormone synthesizing gland, and it produces all of these hormones, which we just covered above. The hypothalamus is what regulates the release of these hormones from the anterior pituitary. So our nervous system is still involved in releasing these hormones that are created in the anterior pituitary. And it does that by secreting releasing factors. But it doesn't have far to go to get to the pituitary gland. So here are the hormones that the anterior pituitary is responsible for. So just to look real quick at the main glands of the endocrine system. So again, we only got to the big guy, the pituitary gland. Unfortunately, we do not have time to get to all these other ones, which we would have normally done in great detail during this unit. So that is it, and just take down some notes, and I'm going to give you a culminating tomorrow for your homeostasis unit.